Let's look at defining a class. So, what is a class? Basically, when we are talking of object-oriented systems, we need to represent various concepts in our problem domain. Say, for example, in a college, if we are developing a system, to keep track of the students, then student is one very important concept that we need to take care of, right? And the idea is that about a particular student we would like to maintain lot of properties and behaviors, okay, and also including relationships. So it's better to keep these properties, behavior, and relationships of a student within its own context. That is one thing. And any changes to it should be taken care of by the particular student object itself. Now, similarly, there might be another very important concept of a lecturer. So again, we would represent that lecturer as a class. And when we are running the system, different instances of these classes will be created. So each instance of this class would represent a particular entity. So if there are 1,000 students, we might end up with creating 1,000 instances of this. But of course, remember, at any given point in time, we would not be looking at all the student objects. We would be interested in a subset of it. Similarly, lecturers. Now, why I brought up this lecturer is because a student will be associated with a class, and the class will in turn be associated with a lecturer. So this is what I mean by relationships. Okay, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. And about the student, let's say we want to maintain a roll number, name, phone, and fees. Okay, payable. This payable I've just added to explain some concept later on. So as of now, let's comment it out. Okay. Now, since we are going to have 1,000 objects, it doesn't make sense to model all of them. And whenever we are trying to create an object of this class, so basically we are categorizing all the objects in a college that we need to keep track of in our system, like student, lecturers, classrooms, classes, streams of study. It is impractical for us to model all of them. So what we do is we categorize them into classes. So a class is nothing but a class of objects where we are interested in the same set of properties, behavior, and relationships with respect to those objects. So here we have a student class, and we have roll number, name, phone number, and fees. Now a class will have a constructor. A constructor is something which gets executed when we try to create an instance. Okay, and when we create an instance, as part of its constructor, we might pass some details to the constructor so that the properties of that student can be initialized. So here I'm passing number, first name, phone number, and total fees, and that is being stored in these attributes or properties of that student. Now this double underscore is very important because this means that this is a private member, a private attribute, or a private property. That means access to this is controlled or can be gained only by its own functions within that class. Later on, I'm going to show you. That's why I put this payable. That if we don't put these two underscores, then in that case, from outside this class also we can directly access this member. Okay. So we have 4 private properties, and again trial I've just put it again later to show you something else. We'll come back to this later. And we have 4 set functions or setters as they are called. Now, when we are creating an object, we are passing all the properties, and that is being stored in these attributes. But later on, we might want to change these values. So that is why we have these set functions. Similarly, we have get functions. If you want to know the name of a student, we can use this function to get the details. So that is what I mean by accessing these only through its own functions. Now, apart from these getters and setters, we would also have some general functions which provide some specific functionality. So here what is happening? Get student info. Instead of calling these one by one, I am creating a function which will return all these details. Okay. So that was the definition of the student class. Now, let's try it. Instead of me accepting the values and all those, using those objects, I'm created it directly by passing it the parameters. So P1 is equal to student 101 Vishwanath 648,975 1 lakh 200. So this is the constructor call. So a constructor name is the same as the class name. So even though it is not mentioned here, student, it is understood that the name of the constructor is the name of the class itself. And what happens is this constructor will create the object and then it will call the init, which will initialize the various members. So P1 is equal to constructor call, and to that constructor we are passing these 4 properties. That will be received here and it will be stored in these private attributes. Okay. Similarly, I have created student 2, student 3. I think I should have mentioned it as S1, S2, S3, but you get the idea. So I have created 3 separate objects of the same class. Now, let's see what this private member means. I will try to access this. See, if I don't put a try and exception try block, what happens is it will give me a runtime error. So to avoid that, I am putting a try block so that I can give a meaningful message. So I'm trying to access the private variable. But strictly speaking, we don't even have to do that. Directly, I can show you that P1 dot, if I say double underscore, I don't get the name. Let me type N. Name is not there. So actually, it is not inaccessible directly. So I don't even have to give a try block. But if I run this, what will happen? Unable to access private variable will be displayed. Now, this is why I wanted this payable. So let's remove that comment block and let's come here. Here again, I'm trying to print P1 dot payable. So will it print or not? Here, if you notice, I don't have a double underscore. That means it is not a private member. So it should print it. So for name, it should display unable to access private variable. For this, it should actually display the payable, amount payable. And now here I am printing the details using the getters of the objects. So print p1 dot get roll number, p1 dot get name, p1 dot get phone, p1 dot get fees. Similarly for p2 and p3. So to access a particular function, which by the way must be public. Yes, so these are all public operations which can be accessed from outside. Generally speaking, functions would be public and properties or attributes would be private. Okay. Now, changing the values using setters of the object. So I am saying p1 dot set name Jyoti. So here actually it is Vishwanath. We need to change it to Jyoti. Similarly, here I am saying set roll number. I'm changing the roll number. Here I'm changing the fees. So here before the changes, so let me just display that before changes. And this is after changes. Again, I'm printing it after making the necessary changes. Now printing the student info without formatting using a single method, that is get student info. Instead of calling get, I have a single function which will return me the details of the student. So p1 dot get student info, p2 dot get student info, and p3 dot get student info. And once you have used up, once you don't need that particular object, you should delete these objects so that it gets cleared from the memory. Now let's run this and see what happens. Okay, 5656, what is that? 5656 is payable. Now remember, there is no double underscore, so it is public. And that is why when I try to print it, I've created these instances. And when I try to access a private variable, private member, it says unable to access private variable. When I try to access a public attribute or property, it actually displays 5656. Then it is displaying the roll number, name, phone, and fees for each of these three objects that were created. Okay. Before changes, actually before changes, we didn't have to actually display this because it's already been displayed here in these statements. It's already been displayed. So we are making the changes and we are displaying the changes. So here we have before changes. Now let's come to this. So here we have 101 Vishwanath, this here 101 Jyoti. So name has been changed to Jyoti. Now what other changes we are doing? We are setting the roll number. So roll number is 102. This is P2. So P2 is this, 102 is being replaced with this number. Similarly, P3 set fees. Previously, P3 was 45,000. Now it is 50,000. So that is making changes using setter methods. Now the printing the student info without formatting is a single method. So here again I am calling the get student info. And what is it doing? This is just picking up the various private members, concatenating them and returning it. So that concatenated string is being displayed here. We could have done something like this. We could have said get roll number, self roll number. Similarly, self get name. Similarly, get phone. And similarly, fees, it has to be converted into string. So otherwise you will not be able to concatenate it. So get fees. So in this function also, instead of directly accessing this, and these can actually directly access it because this operation is again a part of the same class. So a function of a class can access its own, or rather to be more precise, a public function of an object can access its private properties. Now, instead of directly accessing it, I am again going through getters. So now let's see whether it prints. Yes, it still prints. So student info, and then finally I'm deleting these objects. Now let me just say print P1 and let's see what happens. I don't even have to run it because it says name P1 can be undefined. So basically, which means that if I say print P1, it is not sure, but it is still saying can be undefined. So let's see what happens if I press dot, get roll number. Now let's run this. See, name P1 is not defined because we deleted. So that is an class, its constructor, its private attributes, public attribute, and ideally you should not have public attributes. Now what about this trial? We can always create define functions within init, right, and call them. But usually this is done, where we want to do some processing as part of the initialization process itself. So maybe name is being entered, full name is being entered, and we want to split it into first name, middle name, last name. So for that, we might define a function within init. Okay, that is just an example. But after defining it, we need to call it. So now what will happen? When I create an instance by calling the constructor, and that in turn calls the init function, these will be assigned, this will be assigned, and this is defined, and then this trial is called. So it will print trial. Now from outside this init function, it can't be called. We can't say self dot, see, it is not available. So from outside the init, it cannot be called. Okay. Now let me run it and show it to you. So if we go, see, initially we are creating 3 instances. In each case, it is initializing this and then it is calling trial, which is in turn printing trial. Okay, that is one thing. Second thing is, now let's say we are not interested in this. Okay, so that was that. And now let's see, let's put a double underline here and see what happens. Okay, and now let's run it. See here, student object has no attribute set name. So now this set name operation has become a private function, which means it can be called by other functions of the same object and cannot be called from outside. So we could say something like this: self dot set name self comma nm. We could do like this, but in which case we will have to pass that nm as well. So let's say nm, which means from where we are calling, we will have to. So remember, this private function can be called by other functions of the same object, right? Okay, so I think you got the idea. This should be again public so that it can be called from outside. So that is defining a class in Python. That's it. Bye.